Welcome back to Compact Conflicts Convos. Today, I'm here with Caleb. We're going to be talking about the weather and the effects on battles and campaigns it can have. So, Caleb, why is weather important to a campaign or even a battle, I guess?
So yeah, I would say overall, weather and wargaming is one of those kind of slept on topics for sure. I know when you have so many minis on the board, and the umpire is managing where soldiers are going, logistics, um, navies moving around. Weather just kind of falls under the radar. I think the reason why weather is so important is that weather throughout history has determined whether one, a battle happens, or two, whether a battle, an outcome is a defeat or a success. Some examples we can look at is like Agincourt, where the French knights get bogged down in the mud, and that is the sole reason really for the English victory is because of the weather. Um, Another example could be Napoleon at Waterloo, right? It rains that entire night into the morning, and so the French army or the French cannons can't really deploy as early as Napoleon wants. So I think whether it has many different effects, it can slow movement, it could obscure vision. There are just so many avenues you can go down that weather plays such a vital role in the campaign. Looking at navies, I mean, the wind. You have to
Yeah.
have wind in order to conduct any kind of naval warfare. So I would say weather is very important, and I'm surprised that um, it falls under the radar for so many war gamers.
I mean, I agree. If I've usually had weather help me out in a lot of the battles in our campaigns, I've had fog help me out twice now, if I'm not mistaken. Is so for our rule set, and I guess in general, is the types of weather we have. Let's start with the easy one. Obviously, if the sun's shining, clear day, no real impact on that one. Would it be maybe a heat, I guess, depending on where you're at and time of year. But no other impact on that one really, is there?
No, not really. I think that's kind of like your ideal scenario. The sun shining, clear day, maybe a little cloudy to keep your boys a little cool. But other than that, I mean, there's no restrictions on visibility, on movement. And I do agree that maybe, in high summer, the only thing I would say, you might want to take into account as an umpire or war gamer, maybe in high summer, your troops get slightly more exhausted due to the sun shining down on them, right? Especially when we're talking about Rev War, Civil War, when they're wearing like full wool clothes.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can include the need for extra water rations, right? Which you can probably check out our logistics video where we kind of talk about that. But other than that, clear weather really has no many adverse effects.
And I'd go so far as to say if you're doing even ancient war, um, you could use that for heat and everything. They're in full battle armor and everything. Is I think where it would get a little different is maybe World War One because of trenches, and World War Two because you're bringing a lot of the supplies with you. You know,
Hmm.
but I think any
Yeah.
era you want to do your campaign in, these would be good for. So let's go to the easiest of the first weathers. Okay, it's not such a nice day. Depending on the time of year, you've got a little bit of light rain, or maybe it's winter, you got a little bit of light snow. How's that going to help out or not help out with the campaign and your generalships?
Yeah, I think I would say light rain, light snow. These are more aesthetics that you could really apply to the campaign. As far as effects on troops, movements, and all that, I think the only thing we've included is maybe um, the ability of some muskets misfiring due to the light rain. But even then, if it's just like a light drizzle, it's not going to affect muskets too much, especially when you're looking at ancient war. I mean, they're not really using any black powder weapons at that point, so it doesn't really affect them at all. Um, I would say maybe perhaps light rain or light snow might have a little bit of visibility restriction, but not much at all. I'm talking like if fog restricts visibility to 12, then light rain or light snow might restrict it to like 50 inches, right? So maybe just a little variation, but overall, not too different from a nice, clear, sunshiny day.
I agree. I think for the campaign is if you've had, uh, a couple of weeks worth of light rain, maybe some slow movement on the big map and everything would be pretty appropriate. Maybe same for snow because obviously the snow is going to accumulate.
Mhm.
Now let's go into just the gully washers, the heavy snows, the snowbanks that get 4 or 5 to 18 feet high. How is that going to affect your battle as you're playing it out, but also the campaign?
I think 18 feet of snow would definitely affect troop movement for sure. We'll hit snow first and then rain. I think a heavy snow. Um, and how we do it in our rule set is a certain roll equals heavy rain or heavy snow depending on the time of year. So if I roll heavy rain but it's December, then it's actually heavy snow. Um, so as far as snow goes, I would say that this could definitely be a movement restrictor, right? It could slow movement um, on the battle mat. But also, if it's cold enough to snow, stick, and restrict troop movement, it's also possibly cold enough to freeze over creeks and some rivers, right? So now some rivers might be passable on campaign or during battle that aren't normally passable. Um, so that's really something big to think about. Maybe there are breaks in the ice, and so trying to row across might be a little dangerous because you have large bits of ice flying down the river. We're kind of envisioning perhaps Washington crossing the Delaware, right? But heavy snow also is a big visibility restrictor. Um, in some cases, I would say you could treat it just the same as fog. With this, I think you need to restrict your visibility down very low, very low. So maybe now artillery um, can't sight in. Units don't discover the enemy until they're right on top of them. Once again, going back to the example of Washington crossing Delaware, the Battle of Trenton, the sentries around Trenton are quickly overran by the Americans. Right, they don't really have a time to get many shots off at all because they're right on top of them before they realize it. So I think snow really plays a very good stealth factor, but it can also get very chaotic because we're thinking, let's go to another battle, the Battle of Eylau, Napoleon's war against the Russians and the Prussians. He sends two divisions forward, and they just know they're heading towards the Russians, and then suddenly the snow stops and lifts, and then two divisions are facing dozens and dozens of Russian cannons at about 30 yards, and they open fire a canister and pretty much obliterate those divisions, and the attack completely falters. So these are really good for stealth, but also I think you need to include perhaps troops might get lost in heavy snow like this. So coordination will be very difficult. That would be a very cool thing to include. When we're talking on the campaign, snow overall should definitely restrict movement. Um, but you could also include perhaps the need for winter quarters. Keep in mind that there used to be, not now really, but there used to be a warring season, right? During the winter time, most armies went into winter quarters and planned to resume in the spring the campaign and the war. And this goes all the way back really to ancient times. The Romans will go back into
Oh
their
yeah, it still goes
fortifications.
on today too, to a large extent, more than we realize.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that's something you really need to include is perhaps maybe winter attrition. If you decide to move troops in the campaign while there's heavy snow or very cold conditions, perhaps you might have to roll to see, does my force here take attrition due to frostbite, um, water freezing over in the canteens. I mean, believe it or not,
Hmm.
you can get really dehydrated when it's cold.
Yeah,
Not just a heat factor. So I think snow has a lot to offer, especially in battle and campaign more specifically.
I agree. I got one for you too. Is if you're marching in snow and you decide to light fires, is do you get more easily discovered? By a
Mm,
scout or a sentry or something. They see fires on the mountaintop. Oh, now all of China knows we're here.
right.
I agree with you. The snow is. I mean, even today's battlefield. We have a warring season. It's the springs because for as much technology as we have, as much as the world changes, it stays the same. You still got to worry about creeks flooding because snows melt, and then you've got to worry about things freezing depending on where you're at in the world. Um, it still affects a great deal. And what about rain? That also still affects a great deal in the modern battlefield.
Oh, absolutely. I've already given some examples, such as Napoleon at Waterloo, but heavy rain, I think, is probably more of a nightmare than the snow as a war gamer, especially, how we do it when we do campaigns. I think heavy rain, let's hit the campaign first. Heavy rain can affect the passability of certain rivers and creeks,
Mm-hmm.
whereas some creeks might be very passable in the high summer. They might be getting flooded out, right? And now you can't just cross easily like a ford. Um, but that has the reverse effect of maybe now some types of ships or boats can go up and down those rivers. Heavy rain as well can create swampy areas. I know in our battle modes we have a lot of swamp terrain, and if it had rained a heavy rain the previous week, we'll be putting swamps all over the battlefield, which slows movement immensely. I think by half in our rule set. And so now the enemy can perhaps use some of those as choke points, and now you're just trying to slog it out. I mean, kind of think Passchendaele in World War I, right? Attacking
Mm-hmm.
in rain and mud, and it's just awful. But I think you definitely need to reflect that when it comes to battle and to campaigns. I think heavy rain can also restrict visibility. I wouldn't say as much as heavy snow, but I would definitely say a fair amount. Up to the umpire and the players what that is to them.
Terrain
But
and area, whatever campaign you're doing on the map, uh, dependent for certain. Heavy rain can obscure a whole bunch.
absolutely, and you can sneak units around left and right. But I would definitely wouldn't say as much as heavy snow. So guys, just keep that in mind if you're playing a game. But I honestly think, at least for our rule set in our club, the biggest nightmare is when it comes to combat in the heavy rain. We mainly play flintlock era, so 1700 to about the Napoleonic era. Right now, we're starting to get into Civil War, but um, fighting in that time period, your powder might get soaked. Remember, you're opening up your weapon to load the powder into it physically. And so rain getting in there can sodden the powder. And now you can't fire your weapon. I know we did a battle for Charleston. I know we keep talking about Charleston, but there's been so many battles over it.
Oh
One of the
yeah.
battles outside of Charleston, the umpire rolled the D20 and it landed on heavy rain. And it was at that point I had to roll a 5 or a 6 on a D6 for every single unit to see if they could even fire, which sucked. And at that point, I'm on a time crunch. Enemy reinforcements are coming. That's when I just choose to switch over to the bayonet. Um, and that actually kind of saved me a little bit. That although that was a bit of a it was blessing in disguise. I couldn't really fire my weapons, but British cold steel definitely overwhelmed American militia very easily. But it's those kinds of things where if you're relying on firepower, heavy rain, at least in the time period we have,
Mm-hmm.
um, is not conducive at all to what you're looking for. So yeah.
I mean, even just the movements, it throws your movements. I think by like 3/4, if I'm not mistaken. It's uh, it's a nightmare for heavy rains. I don't enjoy fighting in them at all. But the one thing I do enjoy fighting in, because it's a blessing in disguise, fog. Fog has saved me so many times of we both can't see each other, and each time it works out because I really don't want to be seen and I'm trying to escape. But not so much on the campaign. I don't know how fog would work on a big campaign map because that's more time conducive. But battle, how does it work out on the battle, Caleb?
Yeah, and I think whenever you're implementing fog, you need to be kind of smart, right? You can't really roll. Let's say it's like 1 p.m. on a hot July
Right.
summer day. You can't roll for fog and then fog randomly appears, right? It needs to be very situational. Um, but when the situation does dictate and you do roll for fog, I think fog, as you said, you love it, right? I believe there was a battle where the Royal Navy could have completely blasted your lines apart without
Yes.
even having to land their Marines. But because of the fog, the British player could not rely on their naval support at all. And so then they had to physically land Marines to clear you out of the town, which proved to be very bloody for them. So fog can most certainly help a defender. Um, and much as like heavy snow, I like to compare heavy snow and fog because their visibility restrictions are so close. Units can get very lost in the fog and just happen upon the enemy, or they might get lost in the fog and you find out maybe 4 turns in the battle that, oh, this regiment actually left the field
Yeah.
because they got lost on their way to on a flanking movement, right? Um, and with fog, I think there's not really any other adverse effects except visibility. I would say to keep in mind if you're using any type of artillery, whether it be like catapults, cannons, howitzers, um, that those I'm not saying they should be voided out completely, but just because you have units that can see someone in the fog, that doesn't mean that the artillery almost a mile away can see them, right? You still need to play like, okay, can these cannoneers, like, they're hearing the gunshots, but they don't know where it's at, right? So maybe you take a blind fire into the fog and you accidentally hit your own troops, right? That's kind of up to the umpire and maybe players to agree on, but fog should definitely be taken into account. There's many, many, many times where an army has managed to escape the clutches of the enemy from a godsend fog, so to speak.
Yeah.
And with all these weather types, first of all, we roll for them, right? We roll randomly, or maybe the umpire takes some kind of, if it's a historical battle and it rained, like let's say at Waterloo, we're not going to change that up and be like, okay, well, it's not going to rain,
Yeah. It's
right?
like
So, it,
snowing now. Yeah, that would make no sense.
yeah, in scenario battles, like maybe stay close to the actual history, but when it comes to the randomness of our campaigns, that's definitely fine. So we roll for the different types of weather. We also roll for the length. So let's say I roll my d20 and I get heavy rain. Then I'm gonna roll another die to see the length of rain. I'm gonna roll it. Okay, it's 3 turns. So 3 turns of heavy rain, and no one can really use their muskets. But once the rain clears, they can now use their muskets, right? So it keeps it dynamic. Players, I remember there was a battle. I can't remember where, but I kept asking the umpire, I'm like, hey man, when are we rolling for weather again? Because this weather is trash and I can't do anything in it. And finally he rolled forward and it turned clear. The rain clouds disappeared and I was finally able to conduct my attack. Um, Much like Napoleon at Waterloo, like, hey, is this rain going to stop? Is it like, is the ground going to dry so I can go ahead and begin my attack? So definitely include a time length of it. You could just keep it simple and be like, it's going to be this way the whole day. But keep in mind, like, you cannot predict weather. I think you need like an app, like a randomized generator of how long this weather is going to take,
Yeah.
despite whether it be campaign or battle.
I completely agree. You've kind of touched on this one too, but time of day and season is, I mean, obviously for some of these, it'll still snow at night, right? But you kind of touched it on for fog, time of day, but definitely keeping time of day as a factor, probably a minor factor in for the weather. But what about the season it's in? Because obviously it's not going to snow in July in most places. How does the seasons kind of work their way there? Then we'll discuss some naval stuff and random weather.
Yeah, I would say that if you're, and this is basically only, um, this basically is only used if you're doing a campaign, not really a specific set battle.
Right.
But we talk about the campaigning season, right? I think without having to roll for any of these types of weathers, just look at the month. Look at what month it is, and now you can determine what kind of effects are going to happen to the armies. If it's, we can say October through March in New England, then there's going to be maybe some winter effects. Now there are now it's probably harder to move your army in campaign. You're going to take attrition if you move during these months. Maybe food is harder to come by. So if the enemy launches a raid on a food storehouse, maybe that division has to retreat somewhere else in order to find supplies and food. That's kind of what Napoleon's doing on his retreat from Russia. Is his army starving, and he stops, I believe, at Smolensk, and the first troops that arrive at Smolensk absolutely loot the army storehouses. So that way, when the rest of the army arrives, there's nothing to be found. So I definitely think the time of season is definitely more of a campaign aspect. Whenever you're looking into summer, moving troops in high summer without rest, perhaps they take some attrition due to heat casualties. Um, and your fall and your spring, I would say that's kind of like your randomized kind of thing. Like you can kind of decide, like, okay, has it gotten hot yet? Has it gotten cold yet? Pretty much, yeah.
I agree. But you mentioned Napoleon and those troops getting there again. Going back to what I said earlier, as much as we change, there's so much that stays the same. A unit's going to get there and screw over the units that come behind it. Um, so talk about some random weather. It's something we haven't done, but when we were talking about this particular episode we were doing, I had this just moment of pure genius right here. What if there was random weather, such as the tornado, War of 1812, when the British took DC? Tornado of sorts came, hit their camp, took a lot of them out. Is how do you think that would play in? And I know it'd be difficult. You'd have to have a good umpire everybody gets along with and trust that judgment. How do you think that would play out maybe on a campaign or the set battle?
Ooh, I mean, you guys probably drop in the comments if you've heard of battle being waged in a tornado, but I think that
Obviously, they didn't know the tornado was going to happen. It just happened
right,
as they
right,
were
right.
fighting.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those one-off things, you know. I wouldn't say like if you have a D20, if you roll a 20, there's like a tornado, right? I would really say that those random weather effects are actually more applicable out at sea. And we just got done talking about seasons. What about hurricane season? We just did a video on how important the Navy is. Go check it out. But maybe in tornado a hurricane season, you roll maybe a 20 or a 1 depending on how you scale it on a d20 for weather out at sea, and a hurricane appears. Now all ships within a certain vicinity have to go back and stay in port and anchor in, or they risk getting damaged. That those hurricanes, you can get in detail as you want. If you want to map the path of the hurricane through random dice, that's fine, because now that hurricane slams into a port city where there's a garrison. Does some of the garrison get flooded out? Is the city now made indefensible because of this hurricane, or is its significance significantly reduced because of this hurricane? Does the path of the hurricane, does that include the heavy rain factor for the land wherever it makes landfall? I definitely think that a random weather like that, a hurricane, I think that's definitely within the cards. Little one-offs like tornadoes, I wouldn't say use that too terribly much. I would hate to be refighting like a Saratoga battle and a random tornado drops down and takes up the British staff. But I would most certainly say your random effects could be wildfires. Let's say in the heat of summer, you have a special area on your dice chart that indicates a wildfire burns out an area. So now that area is void of, now you can't forage here. Or maybe that smoke spread, or that smoke and ash spreads to a nearby town and lights that on fire. So now you have to dispatch troops to please the local colony and kind of do like a hearts and minds game. So I definitely think this random weather, it's very interesting. I would definitely say do not overuse it. This needs to be like if you have a campaign and you're doing it over, let's say, an actual year's worth of time,
Twice
this
a
only needs to be
game.
done maybe like twice, maybe 3 times max for sure. But definitely include them. It add a little bit of spice to your campaigns.
Is I mean, you kind of already spoke on the naval aspects that I was gonna bring up. Is hurricane season and flooding. So if we go to the Civil War or any war where there's a whole bunch of rivers and they play a prominent part, obviously we're American, so we use our Civil War. the Mississippi flooding. Is those rivers flooding right there, you can get more ships down there, or conversely, your fort's flooded like Fort Henry.
Hmm.
But flooding's another one that it's weather-ish, I suppose, because obviously you need the heavy rains. But something to think about right there when it comes down to the campaigns. And I think that concludes it. Do you have any other thoughts on weather? Anything that I may have forgotten or popped up in your head as we were talking?
Yeah, I would. The last thing I'd want to include is kind of double back on the naval aspect when it comes to weather. You most certainly need to include these weather effects out at sea. Now,
Wind.
wind, right?
Yes, I'm sorry,
Rain's
I
not too
forgot
much of a
that.
big factor, neither of snow, but fog. I remember playing a game where I asked the umpire, I'm like, hey, what's the weather right now? Because I was being chased by, I think, an American squadron, and I only had like a single sloop. And he rolled for it. He said, "You have fog. You have successfully disengaged with the enemy, and they have no idea where you're at." I'm like, "Oh, yes." I think definitely fog is important. I think there's an instance where Napoleon is sailing for his Egyptian campaign, and he almost runs into Nelson, Nelson's fleet. But because of the fog, he passes right past them. So I think fog should definitely be included in sea. But as you mentioned, wind. Wind is the most important piece of weather when you're talking about naval battles, naval campaigns. Whatever area the wind is blowing, if your ships are sailing, with the wind in its sails, include that movement modifier. Give them that bonus. A lot of captains chose to attack maybe in a certain vector should the wind be with them, and they would decide to fight differently if the wind was not with them. We could definitely look at some of Nelson's battles to see examples of that. So if you're doing anything naval related, whether it be you're sailing up a river in order to engage an enemy fort, if you are bombarding a coastal town, or even if you're just sailing out on the open sea looking for the enemy fleet, weather or wind, I should say, in battle and in campaign are very important. If I ask the umpire, "Hey, this turn on the campaign, what's the weather gauge or what's the wind gauge? Where's the wind blowing?" And he tells me it's blowing northeast, then maybe I will decide to choose the direction for my fleet to sail so that way I can move quicker with the wind, faster with the wind. Um, so if you're doing any naval um, campaigning or battling, it most certainly include the wind.
I agree. And as you mentioned wind and Nelson, it made me think of Halsey in World War II. So
Mm.
any era you play this in, uh, Halsey hit the Typhoons twice. Um, and damaged a few ships. I think sank a couple. I'd have to go back and research it again. But weather and typhoons, hurricanes, they're always going to play a part. Wind's always going to play a part, especially you go to Age of Carriers. You got to turn into the
Mhm.
wind. So you need to know which way the wind is so the plane gets lift. But I agree. And next episode is going to be another very, very unique one. It's going to be over politics and the use of spies and how you can incorporate those two and hopefully confuse your enemy if you're lucky. But until then, thanks for stopping by.
That's it for today's episode. For battles, brushes, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe and join the community. Until next time, Generals, see you on the tabletop.